Have you ever noticed that video games and anime tend to be inconsistent when detailing male nipples? In some shows, they virtually never get detailed, while in a few, it seems almost like there is a mandate to include them. When applied to video games, we see a similar situation, though in today's industry with the use of 3D models, the choice to detail nipples usually depends on the textures created for the characters. Outside of a few rare instances, it's difficult to find any that are not simple textures skinned onto a model. The Legend of Zelda series is interesting in this case, because the series seems to usually fall in favor of showing male nipples if they would be visible. Some non-human races, such as bokoblins, are questionable if they would even have them at all. But at least when it comes to Hylians and Gorons, a choice was made to depict them. With the latest entry in the series, Breath of the Wild, as well as Age of Calamity, the exclusion of them on our hero seems very unusual. What is the reasoning behind this? Is it simply an artistic decision? Or could they have simply disappeared over the course of 12,000 years due to evolution? If neither of those are feasible, could there have been a cultural reason behind this? Or did Nintendo hand down some sort of mandate to purposely exclude them? Well, that is the topic for today. I'm Cornelius Belmont, and let's talk about what happened to Link's nipples. I think I should start by explaining that this episode was conceived as an April 1st joke. However, as I developed it, it ended up becoming a more serious topic. Without doubt, there are absolutely some cultural differences between the East and West. And if you haven't been paying attention, the depiction of male nipples is something that differs between the media produced on both ends. Eastern media seems to shy away from it, unless the inclusion of it would be used as a joke, often for shaming fat characters, or drawing attention to specific stereotypes in order to ridicule them. It is unfortunately rare to see a scene in most anime where men are shown with nipples even though it is something that should be visible. There are of course a few exceptions, such as the renowned artist Akira Toriyama and his Dragon Ball and Dragon Quest series, both of which seem to almost have a mandate handed down to include them whenever they would be visible. Western media, on the other hand, seems to take this stance by default. The times when this doesn't happen or is inconsistent about it seems largely related to which studio was in charge of the animation, often with the animation being outsourced to an Eastern studio. All of this seems to imply that there is a cultural difference in the depiction of them in the media, which of course is in stark contrast with the depiction of women in the same media. Animation and video games are of course related, but have degrees of differences between them. In early sprite-based video games, there was a lot more effort into crafting the graphics, and given the small resolution, not detailing nipples could be excused. After all, when a pixel is 1/8 the size of a character's head, detailing the nipples wouldn't make as much sense. Stepping into higher resolution graphics made this a bit more questionable though, as they now had the real estate to actually show that detail, though some games made more of an effort than others. Come the late 90s and early 2000s, 3D models were all the rage, as the character could simply be skinned with a texture and moved about without having to painstakingly draw every frame of animation. At this point, the inclusion of nipples would have been included as merely a one-time creation, as they could create a bare-chested model that would then be posed as needed for any scene in which such a texture was needed. Still, there are times in games where such detail is explicitly excluded, instead of giving a few pixels to add that detail. This of course leads us to the real source of this video, and ultimately to the question of why Link is not detailed with nipples in Breath of the Wild. As I mentioned earlier, originally this was going to be more of a joke, where I point out the inconsistencies in the series, and lead into a biology lesson talking about the nature of nipples in humans, why males have them, and if a feature could realistically disappear naturally through evolution over the course of about 12,000 years. The thing is, the more and more I looked into it, the more I began to realize that the inclusion of nipples is actually a lot more common than I thought throughout the series. I did want to talk about the biology behind them briefly, just to rule out the ridiculous notion that they could disappear from biology due to evolution in just 12,000 years. For this, I'll be making the simple assumption that unless otherwise stated, Hylians are identical to humans. For example, their ears are clearly depicted differently from humans, but the rest of their bodies are virtually the same. There is no reason to assume that they have multiple hearts. That is, heart organs, not these hearts, which are a measurement of their health. Anyhow, the bulk of the answer comes from nipples being developed in a fetus before sex organs are developed. As the body develops, becoming more masculine or feminine, a sex is then decided at birth, typically by the person who delivered them into the world, and usually assigned based on the presence of said organs. During development in early infancy, children often look similar to each other until hormones kick in around puberty. As such, more tissue develops around the breast. Clearly, breast size is a large factor in traditional views of masculine and feminine traits, and also as a function that aids in child raising later on in life. So with nipples rooted so deeply into the development of the body, is it feasible for them to go away through the evolution of men over 12,000 years? The short answer is not really. That is, unless magic or technology is involved. Just as the Zora were being modified into bird creatures in The Wind Waker, it is feasible that something in Hyrule could modify male Hylians to remove this feature. However, such a drastic change for something that is ultimately cosmetic seems very unlikely. As for them going away with natural evolution, well, first there would have to be something drastic in the environment that would make males having nipples somehow impact their survivability. If such a condition were present, then maybe a mutation could arise in children that could then become the dominant trait. Even if this were the case though, it would be very likely that such a change would affect both males and females. And I suspect that various artists and consumers would not be happy if it were revealed that female nipples went extinct alongside their media-friendly male nipples. This all, of course, leads me to believe that the exclusion of male nipples is in the camp of cultural differences, and subsequently, artistic depiction. I want to shoot something down first before I get into that, which is the idea that the style of Breath of the Wild shouldn't have nipples, possibly because it is cel-shaded or more manga-like in style. Such an argument doesn't hold water if you go and take a hard look at The Wind Waker, Phantom Hourglass, and Skyward Sword. In The Wind Waker, the art style is even less detailed and realistic than Breath of the Wild, and yet there was a conscious choice to include nipples on several of the characters. And I'd say, beyond even a joke capacity like I mentioned earlier. Phantom Hourglass also depicts this, and its graphics are even lower quality due to the hardware it runs on. Furthermore, Skyward Sword is very much in the same vein of art style as Breath of the Wild, and the depiction of nipples can be seen in it, though they are scarce. Given that less detailed games depict characters with nipples, and yet Link is without them in Breath of the Wild, it causes me to think that there is another reason behind it. It is very curious though that despite Link not having them, the Gorons in Breath of the Wild do. In fact, the Gorons have been pretty consistent about this beyond their initial appearance in Ocarina of Time. And even then with Majora's Mask, we see some Gorons with them. Those two games also inconsistently depict them on Hylians. But given that that was first generation 3D graphics, I am more willing to accept that there may have been some limitation of texturing at the time. Some characters like Zubora were clearly textured to have them. It's no real surprise that Twilight Princess has the most detail out of all the games to this point, largely as a backlash to Wind Waker to make games with more realistic graphics. In this game we see plenty of Goron nipples, but more importantly, outside of Breath of the Wild, it is the only time we see a bare-chested Link during the sumo training section of the game. The lighting in this room isn't the best, so I went ahead and examined his model so that we could clearly see the textures. And as you can clearly see, this Hylian has nipples. He also has a Triforce symbol on his hand. A neat little inclusion. So what happened here? Ocarina of Time had some nipples in it. The Wind Waker had them. Twilight Princess had them. Phantom Hourglass had them. Skyward Sword had them. So why did they suddenly disappear from Breath of the Wild? Clearly they could have added them if they wanted. And if I take Link's model from the game, add a slight inclusion, you can see that they don't even look out of place had I not spent so much time drawing attention to it. If Link had just woken up in his pool of Sheikah goo, walked over and put on a shirt, I doubt anybody would have even noticed or cared. Well, maybe they would, and I'll get into that as a possible explanation. Another possibility is corporate meddling from Nintendo. You might remember how the internet exploded over the inclusion of Mario's nipples in Super Mario Odyssey. It originally occurred to me that Link's lack of nipples might be a response to that. And to be honest, that whole situation was pretty embarrassing. I ended up discarding this as a possible explanation after investigating when the demos for Odyssey came out compared to the Breath of the Wild demo. And it turns out that Zelda came out first. In that demo, it depicts Link waking up at the start of the game with his nipple-less chest. And so, this could not be a reaction to the Mario Odyssey demo. Looking beyond corporate meddling and cultural differences, I ended up looking into the artistic direction of the game itself to see if there could be an explanation there. I found some interesting things, but I'm hesitant to pin them down as a solid explanation. Eiji Aonuma, back in 2016, had an interview with Time magazine and explained a few of his intentions with the creation of the new game. One of his big goals was to break the conventions of the series up to that point, and one of them was to adjust Link to be more gender neutral. He said that he had made a choice in Twilight Princess to make Link more masculine, which may explain why Link is depicted the way he is, nipples and all, during the sumo training event. Aonuma was specifically trying to make Link in Breath of the Wild more relatable regardless of the gender of whoever was playing the game. And so this may be an explanation of why Link is depicted without nipples. Personally though, I find this logic pretty faulty, and actually the whole concept pretty suspect. If the goal was to make the game more accessible for both boys and girls, even by the more traditional Japanese stance of gender, then the optimal approach would have been to let the player choose a gender at the start of the game. At the time, Linkle existed as a concept, and would notably appear in Hyrule Warriors, though as a joke. If Link's nipples were absent because somehow they would have made him too masculine, then the obvious choice is to simply let us players decide who we want to play as. Honestly, if this was truly the intent of Aonuma, it actually does way more harm than good. Remember that in order to enter Gerudo Town, Link has to go through a quest where he gets access to women's clothing in order to sneak in. While it is great that Nintendo just lets Link cross-dress like this, It is treated as a bit of a joke in the game and even comes off as a bit transphobic. Allowing the player to select a girl character would have circumvented this a bit, though I am willing to concede that adjustments to outfits would have had to have been made to accommodate the female form. Of course, making a gender choice for the characters may have introduced other issues that Nintendo may not be openly willing to embrace. For example, if you could select a girl Link, the relationship with Mipha would then come across as outright lesbian. Not to mention the budding relationship with Zelda in the memories. Though if you ask me, with a male Link as the main character, characters such as Prince Sidon and Yanoble seem to be crushing on him pretty hard. So of the things I have highlighted here, I'd say that the choice to depict Link without nipples is most likely rooted in the cultural views involving them, possibly with a push from Aonuma to make Link more gender neutral. That being said, in both cases, it is very disappointing because the cultural views surrounding their depiction often seem directly related to making jokes at a specific group of individuals. Maybe I'm just overthinking things though, and the real answer is that Nipple Link is just too hot for Nintendo. Let's summarize. When Breath of the Wild came out, a decision was made to depict Link without nipples. In previous titles in the series, Hylians, Gorons, and Link were all depicted with nipples. This inconsistency raises questions as to why Nintendo would depict Link this way. An internal lore reason involving biology and evolution are extremely unlikely due to the nature of how nipples develop in humans. Such a deeply rooted trait couldn't be removed through natural evolution over the course of 12,000 years. As such, unless some mystical means were used, like we see with the Zora Torito in The Wind Waker, this could not be an explanation behind Link's lack of nipples. A conflict with the artistic style of Breath of the Wild depicting them cannot be an explanation either. Other titles such as The Wind Waker and Phantom Hourglass, both games with a more simplistic art style, depict nipples on their characters. In addition, Skyward Sword, which shares a similar art style to Breath of the Wild, also depicts nipples on some of their characters. Differences in culture between West and East media could be a potential explanation, as male nipples are often detailed in Japanese media as a result of trying to be more realistic in art style, or as a joke often aimed at fat or queer shaming. Western media, on the other hand, tends to always depict male nipples in any instance in which they should be visible. The choice to exclude nipples cannot be associated to the internet's reaction to Mario's depiction of them around the same time. This is because the Breath of the Wild trailer predates the Mario Odyssey trailer, and shows Link's bare chest while he is waking up. As such, the decision to depict Link without nipples must have been made earlier in development. Finally, in 2016, Aonuma stated that he had decided to make Link more gender neutral, as a way for both boys and girls to better immerse themselves into the game. This may explain why Link had his nipples removed. However, such a notion raises a more serious question. In particular, why was it that a gender option to play as a girl or a boy was not included instead? And why did the game retain events that were directly tied to Link's gender? If the game was truly trying to be more inclusive, then two gender options should have been created. Such a choice would have also led to a more overt inclusion of queer culture depictions, such as the story involving Mipha, and done a much better job at being inclusive than trying to strip Link of any gendered traits.
Thank you guys for watching the episode. This is a new channel and it will need all the support it can get, so please like and subscribe to help it grow. Going forward, my channel may not be focused entirely on Zelda theories, but considering it is one of my favorite franchises, it's likely to get a lot of the spotlight. In them, I tackle some interesting theories that I've never seen other YouTubers talk about. Feel free to leave your comments below regarding the video, and I will make sure to try to answer them. I welcome all feedback, though I request you keep it constructive. Thanks again for watching. This is Cornelius Belmont signing off.